Hello and welcome to Upstack America's Oracle EBS Financial Expansion Training. My name is Bob and I'm the lead senior consultant for Upstack America. And with me today I have Victor, who is also a senior consultant. And today we are handling lesson 11 of the SLE. And Victor, please walk us through.
Thank you, Bob, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this session in our Financial Functional Training series. We are going to talk about attaching conditions to account derivation rules. We looked at this in our previous session, but remember we said there are two ways to do this, and we looked at one of the ways, which is attaching these conditions to derivation rules through the conditions screen. And so in this session, I want us to look at how to achieve this through creating a mapping set. So a mapping set is the second way in which we can attach conditions to the derivation rules. So we saw how to do it through the condition screen. And remember, we mentioned that sometimes conditions can be very complex to enter. And therefore, a mapping set can make our work easier by just specifying a particular input value. You can tell the system how to derive the output. Okay, so depending on the input value, then the system will give you a particular output, which is just a different way of attaching the conditions. All right. So this is just a representation of what we are going to try to achieve. So in our mapping set, we are going to base it just like our conditions on supplier type. And we are going to say that if the supplier type, which is going to be the input, is a type company, or as we're going to see any other type, then use account 5000. But if the input is food suppliers type, then we want the expense account to be used to be 5011, which is the meals expense account we have defined in our value set. All right. We are going to do this to a segment rule, the rule that we're using to derive the natural account segment. Okay. But you can create a mapping set where the output is the whole combination. Okay. So instead of deriving just the particular segment or any other segment, you can have the output as the whole combination depending on the input. But the way we are doing it, our mapping set is going to have conditions that help it derive just the natural account segment. Just to emphasize, a mapping set is an optional component. So we use a mapping set, like we have said, in a situation such as whereby the conditions are very complex that you want to attach to your account derivation rules. So you just use a mapping set instead to define your conditions. Of course, the example we're using does not contain very complicated conditions, as we saw. We define them pretty quickly, but we are using this to learn how to create mapping sets and to attach them to our account derivation rules. All right, so we are now going to go to Oracle, to SLA module, and see how to create a mapping set. All right. Okay. So let me go to my accounting methods builder and look for accounting methods and definitions here and go to subledger accounting methods. So let's start from the very top. The method we are looking for is Mascani accrual. Under Mascani accrual, these are the application accounting definitions. We have this one attached to the payables application. So let's go inside this one, which contains these various journal line definitions that are associated with these particular event classes. Okay. We modified the journal line definition that's attached to invoices. I accidentally clicked that. So invoices, and let's go inside this. This journal line definitions contains these line types. We modified the account derivation rules that is associated with the line type item expense, and this line type is the one that produces the expense line in our invoices. Okay, so this line type has two rules attached to it. One is the one that derives all segments, and this one is the one that comes from Oracle. All right, so this one reads the whole combination from the distribution account entered in the invoice. And then we defined our own rule that overrides this flex field rule by producing the natural account segment. All right, and this is how we defined the rule. And the rule is that the value type is a constant. All right, so this value 5011 is produced under the condition where the supplier type is food suppliers. Okay, and this is where we define the condition. All right, and then the second line is our otherwise line, right? So use this account if the supplier type is food suppliers. Otherwise, use 5000 for any other type. So this one is not attached or does not have any conditions attached to it. So what we want to do is to change this account derivation rule, and instead of using constant values with conditions attached to them, we are going to use a mapping set, which we are going to attach here. All right, so we don't have a mapping set that we have created at the moment. So what we want to do is to go and create our mapping set. You can click on this button here, mapping set. All right, and we can say that we want to create a new one. All right, and this is the page that you get to when you click that button. So what are we going to call our mapping set? We're going to attach it to the expense line type. So we can say Mascani expenses, expense account supplier expense account. Let's just call it Mascani expense account. Supplier type. Let's add supplier type in the description. Okay. All right. So you come to this section here that says input. And the fields here are lookup application and lookup type. So let's remind ourselves, what's our input? Our input is the supplier type. Our input is the supplier type, okay? So where did we get the supplier types from? Remember, I showed you the lookups, all right? So there's a lookup that contains supplier type, and that lookup is owned by purchasing module or purchasing application. And the name of that lookup is supplier types, all right? So that is what you need to specify here, all right? So the lookup application is purchasing, and the lookup type is supplier, no. Oh, I don't know what happened there. But it looks like I was logged out or something. All right, let's go back. So, okay. We want to create a new one. Start over again, Maskani, expense. We call this expense and suppliers. So again, the lookup application is purchasing. Lookup type, supplier. Supply. Wildcards on both ends. Okay, so valid supplier types is what we are looking for. All right, so do we want to specify the chart of accounts? Yes, because we want to specify the particular segment here. So chart of accounts is Maskani COA. This is for a particular segment, and that segment is the account. You get the name of your actual segments because you have specified the chart of accounts. All right. Now, here, just like this here is where you can say you're defining the conditions, okay? So you have value type. The value type we are going to say is input, okay? What is the input value? Now, when you look at the input values, it gives you the list of supplier types because you have specified the supplier here in the input up here. So it gives you the supplier types in this lookup under the input value. So we want, if our input value is food supplies, we want the output to be what? So output value, again, you have specified here the chart of accounts and the segment. So that's the values you're going to get, the values in under that segment. So we want the output to be meals, Start date. So for this particular field for start date, what start date means is transaction date. All right. So remember, we are in SLA module, which creates accounting for particular transactions, for all transactions, let me put it that way, from the subledger modules, okay? So you can think about this as this particular value or the account derivation rules that we are going to attach to this mapping set is going to create accounting for particular transactions. So this is the start date for the earliest transaction date that can be used, right? So that's what this start date means, the earliest transaction date. So for example, if we enter the system date, this means that this value will only be used for transactions that have a date of 28th January going forward, all right? But perhaps maybe you want to create accounting for transactions that took place before this date. So you can enter a date that's way back, okay? So we can enter here, for example, if we know that we won't be creating transactions from earlier, we can see here from January 2010, okay, the beginning of 2010. So this is something in an actual project that you would gather information about, all right, so that you can know what to enter. So we're going to put that as our start date. So this is the first input. Input value is food supplies. Output is this expense that is related to meals, okay? Let's go to the second line. So what is our condition? Our condition is if the supplier type is food supplies, use account 5011. Otherwise, use account 5000. So for any other kind of supplier type, and we have seen there are very many of them, and you can classify your suppliers as any of these types, okay, in the supplier entry page or the particular supplier page. So we want that if supply is any of these other types that you may use, then the account that will be used will be 5000, all right? So does that mean that we go and input values for each and those suppliers? That wouldn't make sense, right? Because that's a lot of work. So the way we do it is that we specify a default value, right? And this is such as us saying that this value will be used without any conditions. You remember how we define this using the conditions by saying there are no conditions attached to this. So this is the same thing we are doing here. So this is the default value that's going to be used for any other kind of input. So we say 5000 and I picked so 5000. And we can have the same start date here. Shift F5 should copy this. So Shift F5 to copy any information that's in the above field. So this is our mapping set, which is pretty simple. We can save it. Now what we need to do is attach this mapping set or associate this mapping set with account derivation rule, right? So we have a mapping set. Now we want to attach this to the account derivation rule. So as you can see, this is our mapping set, which we have saved, so we can close. And then now this is the account derivation rule. And this here describes how the value is obtained. So if we're using a mapping set, then we need to tell the system that we are going to be using a mapping set. So what do we change? We change here under priorities. And for value type here, we change this to mapping set. All right. So we said we are going to use a mapping set. So what's that mapping set? The mapping set we have created is called Maskani expense suppliers. All right. Input source is basically the lookup type again. We have to enter it here. So the input source was valid supplier types. Oh boy. They have different names in different fields. So I don't know. Let's look for vendor. Nothing. Supplier type. Supplier type. So the input source is supplier type. All right. Okay, so now under this mapping set, we have already described the input and output for every scenario. Input, where the input is supplier type, and the only one we are concerned about is food supplies, where we have specified a particular account. And we have said for any other, we use a particular constant account, right? So we don't need this second line. Whatever we were trying to do on these priorities lines, we have done within the mapping set. So we need to delete this second line. Okay. The other thing we need to do is to go into the conditions and remove the conditions, because the conditions are already defined within the mapping set. So let's delete this and save. So we have our new account derivation rule, right, which is using a mapping set to derive the accounts. And let's save here. Okay, so you see the condition has been removed. So we have done what we were aiming to do. We have changed the way we attach conditions to this particular rule, and now instead of using conditions straight on the condition screen, we're using a mapping set. And let's see whether the mapping set is going to work. So let's go and create some accounting. But actually, we need to validate the changes we have made. So let me go to this application accounting definition, and you can see here it says not validated. All right, because we made those changes, so we need to validate this. I have to wait for this to complete because I can't even use my cursor. All right, so it's been validated. And now we can go and test out the changes we've made. So we should expect the same result from the last time we created accounting. But if that's a good thing, if we get the same result, it means that the mapping set is working the same way as the conditions we had defined. Okay. So let's go to invoices, entry, invoice batches. We're going to go to the same batch that we had created for this. I believe we called it SLA test. SLA expenses rules. So invoices should have two invoices to two different suppliers here. So one is for Chakula Caterers, which is a food supplier type supplier, and the other one is Big Builders, which will serve as our otherwise supplier. So this invoice is validated and we can create draft accounting for it. So let's go to actions and create accounting in draft form. That's been selected. Okay. So let's go to tools and view accounting events. Let's see the journal entries. And for this, okay, so the item expense, you can see, is being used for Chakula Caterers as 5,011, and that's good because this is our food supplier. We go back and look at the accounting now for this, which is the invoice to Big Builders, which is not a food supplier type. View accounting events. And hold on. So this is the invoice date. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let me go and create accounting for this particular invoice so that I can be sure it's for today. So create accounting for this invoice because there are two invoices in this batch. So, okay. Now let's go and view accounting events and view journal entries. All right, so the date here is good. So you can see for Big Builders, the account being used is 5,000, which is what we wanted. All right. So our mapping set is working the way it's supposed to. It's working the same way as the conditions. So we have now covered both ways of attaching conditions to account derivation rules. One is direct through the condition screen, and the other one is creating a mapping set and attaching it to your account derivation rules. Mapping set is convenient in helping us define more account derivation rules that contain complex conditions we can just define them as a series of input and output values. You can use mapping sets to produce segment rules or whole combination of what we call flex field rules. So that's it for attaching conditions to account derivation rules. Bob, unless you have something to add, we can stop there.
All right, Victor, thank you so much.
Thank you.